All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. I brought Lee Reiners on to discuss all things cryptocurrency, which continues to make the news, continues to survive despite all the bad news, continues to perplex and confuse many folks. How are you doing, Lee?
Well, Greg, how are you?
I'm excellent. Lee is a lecturing fellow at both the Duke Financial Economics Center and at Duke Law. And, I'm thinking about back to my law school days. I see you're teaching fintech law and policy, cryptocurrency law and policy, financial regulatory policy, climate change and financial markets, and cybersecurity law. All amazing topics. And I'm thinking back to my law school days. There was nothing like that around.
Yeah, times have changed, but it's a lot of fun. I like the variety, and the students are really into this stuff, So I feed off of their energy, and certainly the news as it pertains to crypto and fintech and cyber over the last couple of years has given us plenty to talk about in the classroom. So it makes for lively discussion, which I appreciate as a professor. You don't want to be just lecturing, hearing yourself talk for for an hour straight. At least I don't. So I like the students to participate, and when this stuff is in the front page of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, it helps get folks involved.
And yeah, listen, I'm going to ask you in a little bit what the students are most intrigued about. Like, what have they done to pique your curiosity? But before I go on to that, I sort of want to ask the audience, although it's not a participatory audience, a trivia question. Aside from the fact that these are famous people, what do Tom Brady, Larry David, Kim Kardashian, Shaquille O'Neal all have in common? And the answer is they're all getting sued for their cryptocurrency promotion. And we're going to get into that. Why are they getting sued, and FTX and all the collapses, and with all this stuff, Bitcoin seems to stay alive. We're going to get into that also. So let's get into. I want to try to talk to me about your students. What in the crypto space? What have they, said or asked or done that's made you like scratch your head and like say, "Wow, that's fascinating."
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. I mean, so, I teach law students, and, by definition, there's, law students I think are risk averse, right? There's, obviously there's students who are generally interested in the law, but, it's kind of also something that, young people do when they're not quite sure what else they want to do or what else they're good at. But, they know that law school, certainly at a place like Duke, is a path to a pretty decent lifestyle. So, I always ask my students on the first day of class in the cryptocurrency law and policy course, ask them, how many of you own crypto or have ever owned crypto? Raise your hand. And, you'd be surprised. It's less, I'd say it's probably about a quarter of the class. And, my class is around 25 students or so. So it's less than a quarter. And that's been pretty steady over the years. Now, if I were to go across the street at Duke to the business school and ask students there, in any given class, really, how many of them have owned cryptocurrency, you would probably see all the hands up, right? And not to cast aspersions on business school students, but the reality is that they tend to chase trends. And certainly crypto's been a growing trend. So, back to my law students, I think most of them are just curious about it. Very few are coming in with, really hardened views or, are passionate about it. They've heard about it, of course. They probably have a friend or a relative who's like really into it and has talked their ears off. And I'm sure folks listening, have been at a cocktail party or, or somewhere else, and they've encountered someone who is, all in on crypto and is, talking to them about how great it is and how they need to get into it and whatnot. So my law students have that, but we're also at the point now where pretty much every major law firm has a fintech practice group. And within that fintech practice group, they are serving, crypto clients. And so a lot of students view this as an opportunity to develop, specific expertise that they can deploy then when they go into the workforce. And at Duke Law, most students do go on to careers in big law initially. And I think that's what makes it really exciting and fun to teach these students, because I say, look, right now, no one has started off their career as a crypto law or regulatory expert, right? People who are doing it now have kind of come into it through a variety of different pathways, because it's just so new. And so by taking my class, you are de facto at the end of it, crypto law expert, crypto regulatory expert, and you can hit the ground running, no matter where you land. And certainly crypto firms are in desperate need of high quality legal advice. Frankly, they haven't been getting very good legal advice, in my opinion. In many cases, these firms have been willfully ignoring their lawyers' advice. But nonetheless, there's an opportunity for my students to really make an impact immediately. So, I don't think that they necessarily have very fixed views on crypto. I've had a few over the years that are pretty into it and think it's gonna be the future of money and this and that. But most of them are just curious, and that's what I think makes for a fun classroom dynamic.
Nice, nice. And so it's funny that they can come out and actually be at the top of the food chain, in the regulatory. And that's, I think, a very big burgeoning area. I think that the cryptocurrency world, they're not listening to their attorneys and there's no regulation. So it's the Wild West.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is the Wild West. I would rebut the point about there's no regulation. I mean, there's actually a lot of regulation. It's just a lot of these firms either aren't aware of it or choose to ignore it. Either way, that means that they need a good lawyer, which hopefully I'm training. And that's really my background's in financial regulation. I'm actually not a lawyer, but I worked at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York prior to coming to Duke. Primarily doing large bank supervision and then some regulatory policy work. So I really come at this issue from, financial regulatory lens. Now, as I've gotten further into the weeds, of course, I'm fully immersed in the securities law implications, you name it. So really everything related to crypto, the legal issues, the regulatory issues, the policy issues. I've explored it in depth. I've testified on crypto regulation twice in Congress. I was at the Senate Banking Committee in February. So at the House Financial Services Committee in March, they created a new subcommittee on digital assets. So I was at the very first hearing of that new subcommittee. So I think kind of my personal journey here is also reflective of the fact that there's really not a lot of folks out there who kind of understand one, the technology behind crypto, two, the financial regulatory landscape, how crypto fits or doesn't fit, and then three, the legal implications of crypto and its various aspects and how it's used. So I think I kind of bring all that to the table, and hopefully that's what I'm training my students to do as well.
All right. So most, I'm hearing in the newspaper, it seems like once a month, FTX, BlockFi, Celsius, Voyager Digital, Three Arrows Capital. I'm sure there's others that I'm missing that all have essentially collapsed.
Yeah.
Some have gone into bankruptcy. Others are, I don't even know. They're actually in criminal court. But what is there a common theme? Is this indicative of the problems with cryptocurrency? What's going on with all these collapses?
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. And each one of those cases you mentioned is going to have an idiosyncratic component, but I think there's more in common than there is distinct. And what's in common is at the end of the day, these are crypto firms. These are firms that are specifically focused on, exclusively focused on cryptocurrency. And the thing about crypto, there's a lot of things about crypto that are different than traditional finance. But these are assets, if you want to call them that can be created out of thin air, right? That they are not tied to any productive purpose in the quote unquote real economy. So if we think of, normal financial assets, we think of things like stocks and bonds, right? if you own a share of a company, you own part of that company, right? And that entitles you to things like dividends and whatnot. So you're expecting, but you own a piece of that company. You get to participate in the governance of that company, through voting your shares and whatnot. But there's a real company with real assets behind those shares. Similar if you own a bond, right? A bond entitles you to a fixed stream of payments, from a company, again, a real company in the real economy. Anyone with a computer can mint crypto assets. There's really no issuer per se behind a lot of these things. And so when you can create assets out of thin air, that allows you to grow spectacularly fast. And it also allows you to accumulate a lot of leverage, right? Because then you can create assets out of thin air and then, maybe, send out a few tweets, right? Kind of you pump up the value of these things, you get people to invest, drives the price up, and then you can kind of pledge them as collateral for, for loans and things of that nature. So, it really, when you look at kind of financial bubbles over history, right? One of the commonalities is leverage, borrowed money. And with crypto, these firms were able to take on a lot of leverage in a very short period of time. So, I always come back to the question, which is, why are these things, worth anything at all? Right? You look at Bitcoin today, around $30,000. Well, why is it $30,000 and not $100,000 or not, $5? Right? What's the valuation methodology that you're applying? And I've yet to get a good answer on that. And I think, these are assets that trade entirely on sentiment. And the thing about, sentiment is that it can be extremely fickle, right? Just, Elon Musk sends out a tweet about, buying Bitcoin or buying Dogecoin and the price goes up 20%, right? And then he, sends out another tweet a few weeks later about how he's, getting rid of it. Or he goes on Saturday Night Live and says it's a hustle, right? Then the price goes down. I mean, that's reflective of, these are assets that are based on nothing but sentiment. So, it's a bit of a long-winded answer there, but, again, going back to these companies, crypto has sort of gone through various cycles, right, over time. And I think it's important to keep in mind that Bitcoin, the first and most popular cryptocurrency, was created in 2008. The first Bitcoin transaction occurred in January 2009. So we're 14 years into this cryptocurrency business. That's not new. That's, by technology standards, it's pretty old. So we've seen various cycles. And what happened is that, prior to the pandemic, kind of crypto had been depressed from a price standpoint for a few years. Then the pandemic happens. People are at home. They're bored. They're looking for something to do. By the way, the federal government passed multiple rounds of fiscal stimulus that sent direct checks to millions of American consumers. And so many of these people, primarily young men, found their way to crypto. And guess what? It's not the only thing they found, right? Remember the meme stock craze, the GameStops, the AMCs of the world. And then we also have to keep in mind that, for most of crypto's history, it existed in essentially a zero interest rate environment, right? The Federal Reserve pushed interest rates to zero post 2008 financial crisis and kept them there. And then when the pandemic happened, they actually, pushed rates down, even lower. And so anytime you have, loose monetary policy like that, near zero interest rates, you see prices for all speculative assets go up. So there's kind of a combination of factors that really came to bear and pushed crypto prices to stratospheric heights in 2001. But then we saw inflation rear its ugly head. And then at that moment, crypto prices plummeted, as did prices for other riskier assets like tech companies. And then once the prices started to go down, you saw a number of these crypto firms, swimming naked, so to speak, right? The famous Warren Buffett quip, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. And so these elevated prices were able to conceal a lot of just bad behavior, poor governance, poor risk management, excess leverage, you name it. And so once prices went down, then it was just one domino after another. And the fact that, it was one domino after another reflects how tightly interconnected the crypto economy is, right? So FTX was not an isolated incident. You mentioned a number of firms that failed prior to FTX, and there are other crypto companies that failed after FTX. And one of crypto's main problems is that there's no lender of last resort to step in and stop the hemorrhaging when something like that occurs, right? Of course, in the traditional financial system, we have the Federal Reserve, who's able to provide emergency liquidity assistance to otherwise solvent firms, and that provides a degree of calm to the market, right? Well, of course, the Federal Reserve is not going to backstop crypto firms, nor should they. So you had there's no way to kind of catch the falling knife. And so, and here we are. And, as you mentioned, prices have stabilized. There haven't been in the last couple of months any, very high profile failures, but, I'm sure there's going to be another type of FTX in the near future, because, crypto has done this repeatedly throughout its history.
So these firms, what was their pitch to get clients? I mean, when I've had crypto for a number of years, and I kind of would always hear about staking and the lending and these high rates. And to me, I was like, they're not lenders, I mean, this is not a bank. They're not, they don't have that. I'm a bank. I'm, under a regulatory umbrella or whatever. And to me, what were these firms doing? Were they just going out and telling people, hey, if you give us your crypto, your crypto is going to kick out 8% interest?
Yeah.
Was that basically the gist of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, they were all selling the promise of returns, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what they were doing. Now, how they were generating those returns or claiming that they were generating those returns, right, is, can vary. But, there's the old adage that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And certainly that was the case when it came to most of these crypto firms. And I think it's telling that, many of these firms used language and terms from the traditional financial system intentionally to get customers to think of them as like a traditional regulated financial institution. So look at Voyager, for instance. They referred to themselves as a broker, a digital asset broker, right? And I think we're all familiar, with the term broker. FTX, called themselves a crypto exchange, as do most cryptocurrency, they exchanges, right? I prefer the term platform, because exchange has, real regulatory connotation, right? We think of the New York Stock Exchange, for instance, as an exchange. Well, of course, the New York Stock Exchange is very different, not only in how it's structured, but how it's regulated compared to these cryptocurrency exchanges. Some of them refer to themselves as lender. You look at Celsius, a particularly egregious example. Alex Mashinsky, the CEO of Celsius, used to go around wearing T-shirts saying banks are evil, right? I mean, that was kind of his selling point, is that we provide a bank-like service, but we're not a bank. And we can give you 18% yield. We can promise you 18% yield at a time when interest rates in the real economy were barely above zero, right? So how is that possible? How is it possible to generate 18% yield? Well, it wasn't. It was effectively a Ponzi scheme. So all of these businesses were a bit different. So, let's just take Celsius again. Let's say you had crypto, you would lend it to Celsius. Celsius would then lend it to your crypto to, other primarily crypto entities, so crypto trading firms. And it would capture a spread, right? It would pay you, and then, people would pay Celsius to borrow the crypto, and they would pass that on to you. Well, again, it was mostly structured as a Ponzi scheme. FTX, how did FTX make money? Well, just like any or how was it supposed to make money, at least, by transaction fees, right? Just like any exchange, the more transactions that occur, the more fees that are generated. Now, FTX also had, a lending program as well, similar to Celsius. So, again, these are all variations of things that we see and are familiar with in the traditional financial system. The difference, of course, is that they occurred outside the regulatory perimeter, where there was very little by way of customer protections, investor protections. And I'll end on this note, Greg. I think one of the great ironies of crypto is that for a technology premised on disintermediation, right? You go back to the Satoshi white paper, which kickstarted this whole thing. Halloween 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto posted a 9-page white paper to a cryptographic message board. It's all about peer-to-peer payments without the need for any trusted intermediaries, right? That's what crypto, the foundation of crypto, was and is. Well, all these firms that I've just talked about, guess what? They're intermediaries, right? So all that the crypto industry has done is replace one set of intermediaries, primarily regulated banks, brokers, exchanges, with another set of intermediaries that are completely unregulated. And so, given that, I don't think any of us should be surprised at the state of affairs that we currently find ourselves in.
All right, I just want to go quickly onto Satoshi, and like I hear consistently from a lot of my friends from the Northeast, all sordid roads end up in Miami. So I was not really following the story that in depthly, but I believe that in South Florida there was a lawsuit where the alleged person who was Satoshi, that became an issue in the case. Were they Satoshi? And there was a decision on that. Did I get that story right?
I'm not familiar with the particulars of that story. I mean, many people over the years have claimed to be Satoshi.
Yeah.
So there's and just like many people have claimed to be the second coming of Jesus Christ, right? And none of these people have been verified to be the real person. So we still don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the when I talk to my students about crypto, and obviously I have you have to start with the Satoshi white paper, right? I mean, that's kind of the origins. And I think, and I say, like, think of how incredible this is. Here we are, in a matter of years, a multi-trillion asset class was created by someone that we have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so we don't. I mean, so many people have claimed we don't know who they are. We do know that they're sitting on, billions of Bitcoin, so like we know, Satoshi's, public address. And they haven't moved their Bitcoins. So many have speculated, and I'm familiar with all the litigation, but at the end of the day, obviously someone knows, but or presumably someone did know. But the public is still not aware of who Satoshi is, and it adds to the mystique of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a great story. It almost sounds fictional. All right, so FTX again, Miami, the Miami Arena.
Yes. Well, as you said,
FTX,
Miami, Florida, a sunny place for shady people.
shady people, not me, but yeah, I operate under an umbrella. But FTX, all right, so Sam Bankman Freed, again, one of these platforms, exchanges or whatever that, gets into big trouble. This guy's, I mean, is he in trouble criminally? Do you?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
He's in big trouble. He's in big trouble. Look, Sam, it's pretty clear that Sam Bankman Freed is going to go to jail. It's just a matter of for how long. Given the charges brought against him, and the dollar amount of customer losses, theft, really. He's conceivably looking at spending the rest of his life behind bars. So we have securities fraud, conspiracy to commit conspiracy fraud, violating campaign finance laws, bribery. So the Department of Justice is alleging that Sam Bankman-Fried bribed a Chinese government official. So there's a laundry list of charges that have been brought against him. We know that several of his former top executives, including his former girlfriend, Carolyn Ellison, are working with prosecutors. She and his fellow co-founder, Gary Wang, have already pled guilty and are cooperating. The New York Times recently reported on just the extraordinary volume of evidence that they've accumulated. Apparently it's unlike anything that some of these prosecutors have seen before. I mean, everything from emails to Slack messages to text messages to messages on Discord. I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried was, he would literally talk to anyone. Communication with reporters. I mean, even after FTX failed, he was tweeting. He started a newsletter. He started his own Substack, and communicating with reporters. So there is just a overwhelming amount of evidence out there. Frankly, I don't know, people have talked about a potential plea deal. I don't see why the government would even offer him one, to be honest with you. Maybe it provided that he was willing to spend 20 years or so, maybe it would spare the administrative expense of going to trial. But from my standpoint, it seems like they have the goods. So that's going to happen in October. And of course, there's also pending civil litigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and that will commence after the criminal proceedings. But certainly it's not looking good for Sam Bankman-Fried at the moment.
Nor is it good. Nor is it looking good for the customers.
Yeah, and that's
I mean, what approximately how much loss was there? And then my question is, where is that? Where's that?
Where's the money, right? That's
the money. Somebody's got it.
Yeah, where's the money? That's always the question. So we're still learning, and every week that the current CEO John Ray is kind of, and his team are providing some more information. But at approximately around $8 billion, right? Eight with a B, is the size of their hole in their balance sheet. Okay, and of course, that's a lot of money. I mean, there's over 1 million individual claimants, and I think it's important to keep these people in mind. Obviously, the figure of Sam Bankman-Fried himself attracts most of the media attention, but there are millions of people, including thousands of folks here in America, who lost everything. Right, certainly lost more than they could afford to lose. I mean, you're talking retirement money, your children's education money. And it's really not looking good for those folks, just given the history of crypto firm failures. I mean, you can go all the way back to 2015 when the Japanese-based crypto exchange Mt. Gox got hacked, and everyone's money was stolen, and those customers still haven't gotten anything. So John Ray, the current CEO, is going to do everything he can to recoup those sell assets and make those creditors customers try to restore some of their money, but it's looking pretty bleak. So we can get into kind of how the fraud happened, but in essence, I think we can say that he stole $8 billion of his customers' money.
Yeah, so this wasn't really about over leverage. This was just a bad apple.
Yeah, I mean,
and start off that way.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting aspects of it. One of the things that surprised me is someone who's really spent a lot of my time immersed in these crypto policy debates. Speaking with folks on Capitol Hill, speaking with Hill staffers, speaking with folks at regulatory agencies. And I was surprised at sort of how quickly the narrative change post FTX. I mean, you kind of thought that, for a while, like, hey, this might be like kind of the death knell of crypto, right? Or certainly, policymakers are set to crack down. But the crypto industry, there's a lot of money, a lot at stake. They're pretty effective from a PR standpoint. And the way they kind of spun it was like, look, this is just, fraud. I mean, this is just a bad apple, right? And, fraud occurs in traditional, fraud occurs everywhere. I mean, fraud occurs in the traditional financial system, and we don't say we should, ban stocks or, whatever it may be. Crypto is here to stay, and we need to, kind of embrace this industry because it's the future of this, that, you name it. And, that unfortunately, from my standpoint, that logic has taken hold amongst many folks on Capitol Hill. And my rebuttal to that is, yes, this is fraud, right? I mean, using customer money to cover up bad trades, which is what happened here, right? And just to explain for all the listeners, what FTX consisted of, multiple, legal entities and kind of business units. They had an affiliated crypto prop trading firm, right? Crypto hedge fund called Alameda Research, right? Fully owned by Sam Bankman Freed. The CEO was his, on again, off again girlfriend, Caroline Ellison. And they made a series of bad bets. And they had borrowed heavily to make those bets. And so when they had to sort of pay off their creditors, they didn't have the funds to do it. And so what Sam Bankman-Fried did is he essentially lent customer assets to Alameda so they can pay off their bad bets. Okay. Now, Alameda collateralized that borrowing of customer assets through a cryptocurrency called FTT, which was FTX's exchange token. So FTT was a token that was completely controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried. It was just minted out of thin air. So it was just, funny money. And he was able to kind of keep this fraud going for a while because FTT did have a tangible market value. And if customers were ever trying to withdraw money from FTX, he could just, he could mint FTT, sell it for dollars and give those dollars back to customers who are withdrawing their crypto from FTX. Now, what really kind of, it is quick the way it happened, but ultimately what kind of popped the whole FTX bubble was once, FTT sort of came under question. So there was a crypto news site called CoinDesk that published I think it was an Alameda balance sheet that basically said like Alameda was holding on to a whole bunch of this FTT. That was kind of like their main asset. And obviously everyone knew that, that FTT was probably given to them by Sam Bankman-Fried. And then you had the CEO, Changpeng Zhao, CZ, as he's commonly known, of the largest crypto platform, largest crypto exchange in the world, Binance. Once that leaked balance sheet came out, he tweeted out that he was going to start to sell his FTT because they, through a previous deal, Binance had acquired a lot of FTT. And so once he started to sell and announced that he was going to sell, then the value of FTT plummeted, and this whole scheme quickly unraveled. And then, customers, it's kind of like a classic bank run. Customers are trying to take their money out of FTX, and there's no way for FTX to make them whole. So, that's kind of the Cliff Notes explanation of what happened. So, again, there's a common element to this, which is using customer funds, right, to cover up bad trades. We saw this with MF Global and John Corzine, right? Back in, what was it, 2012, 2013 timeframe. But this whole thing was made possible by crypto, right? This was collateral, these loaning customer funds was collateralized by this token that they minted out of thin air, right? FTX, when it failed, was like 2 or 3 years old. It went from zero to a $32 billion company, right, in 2 years. Well, that's only possible in the world of crypto, right? So crypto fueled FTX's meteoric rise, and the nature of crypto is what also allowed it to collapse in a blink of an eye. And so, I just push back against these folks who say, well, this is just, garden variety financial fraud. There's nothing unique to crypto. No, crypto was actually essential to this whole thing. And obviously that's going to, I think, play out more once we get to the criminal trial.
So one of the interesting issues that I think arose from these platforms filing for bankruptcy was the news that it imparted to the customers, which is that your cryptocurrency that you sent to these platforms is not yours.
Yeah.
It's theirs. So they go into bankruptcy, trustee gets a hold of it, and you're like, so I know there was a recent ruling maybe a couple of months ago, at least for one of these exchanges, that said the coins were the customers. Did I get that right? And
no, it was the other way around. So I think the Celsius bankruptcy judge said that the coins belong to the estate, the bankruptcy estate, and that customers were just unsecured creditors, general unsecured creditors. And yeah, I mean, so a lot of folks found this out the hard way. This was not a shock, to me or to anyone else who had kind of been following the legal and regulatory issues with crypto and these firms, because it's flat out says this in the terms of service.
Right.
When you create an account at FTX or Celsius or you name it, it says that that cryptocurrency you purchase on these platforms, can essentially belongs to these platforms, and they can do with it as they please. And what this meant then, of course, is once these firms failed, these customers had to get in line
Yeah.
in the bankruptcy estate. And of course, you're having average Joes, try to navigate the complexity of the bankruptcy process. I mean, good luck. And so, you've actually, what's interesting you've seen spring up is a secondary market for trading claims. So, if you actually have let's say you had $100 stuck on Celsius, you could sell that for, $15.
$3.
Yeah, something like that. On various platforms. So, including, and some of these platforms are being created by people who had previously ran crypto firms that failed, right?
Yeah.
Which is, crazy. So
That's
yeah, I mean,
$2.
it's really troubling. And of course, that's a very different state of affairs than obviously banks, right? I mean, provided that you're under the $250,000
Yeah.
deposit insurance threshold, I mean, you're going to get your money back if the bank fails. If your broker fails, right? If you have an account at Charles Schwab, you're covered under SIPC, the Securities Investor Protection Corporation, right? That covers, to make sure that you still have access to your assets if a broker fails. Well, again, none of those protections apply in the cryptocurrency context, and millions of people found that out the hard way.
Yeah. So I guess the new phrase that we're going to have to create, maybe it's already been created, is the crypto version of pennies on the dollar. What would pennies on the dollar be in the crypto world? A coin is a coin.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still, the crypto world still uses the US dollar as the numeraire. I mean, everything is denominated in dollars.
Yeah.
So I think the phrase still holds,
Applies. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
yeah.
Well, I was just trying to be cute, tongue in cheek. All right.
Well,
Now,
if you can think of something, I'll, run with it.
all right, give me a couple of days. So, all right, you told us that FTX criminal proceedings, then the SEC is going to go after them civilly. But I'm getting a lot of emails from my world, the mass tort class action world, that there's a class action going on against FTX. And of course, my first question is, well, what are they going to get? I mean, is this $8 billion under a rock? Is it in somebody's bed? Is it in the desert? So that raises the issue of Shaquille O'Neal, Larry David, Tom Brady. Why are they all of a sudden involved in this litigation?
Yeah, I mean, so I think your listeners are going to be familiar with a number of the FTX celebrity endorsers, right? You go back to the 2022 Super Bowl. There was a famous ad involving Larry David, where Larry David throughout history is dismissive of various inventions, right? Like the wheel and fire and whatnot, and obviously things that are very useful. And then it kind of fast forward to present time, and someone's in his office pitching him on crypto and buying it on FTX, and he's like, I don't think so, and I'm never wrong about these things. And it was a clever ad. Certainly got a lot of folks talking. After the Super Bowl, I think it's the only commercial that Larry David has ever been in, or any endorsement he's ever been in. And so and you go back to they had the FTX bought the naming rights to the Miami Heat Arena. So FTX really leaned heavily on celebrity endorsers. And I think it's worth taking a step back and noting that, the whole reason that companies pay celebrities to endorse their products is they think it will help generate sales, right? Otherwise, there would be no such thing as celebrity endorsers. So, by that definition, there's plenty of people out there that bought crypto on FTX because of, they saw a Steph Curry commercial or a Larry David commercial or a Shaquille O'Neal ad or you name it. And if you go and you look at the actual content in some of these commercials, in light of what we know now, I mean, it's very troubling. I mean, the Steph Curry ad, that commercial, the whole ad is premised on he's not an expert on crypto. But with FTX, he doesn't need to be an expert because he has everything he needs to buy and sell cryptocurrency safely. Right. I mean, that's the premise of the ad. And that was generally the theme of kind of all the ads. Right. And it was sort of playing on the fact that, most people were kind of, uncertain about crypto, maybe kind of aware of some of the shadiness that had been going on in the crypto industry, but FTX was differentiating itself as the trusted crypto intermediary. And how could you trust it? Well, because they had these brand name celebrities. They had Tom Brady, they had Steph Curry. I mean, they had these people that folks looked up to and admired, and they assumed that, well, FTX must be safe, it must be legit. Because, otherwise, why would Tom Brady, who's got, tens of millions of dollars, or, Steph Curry, so why would they do this? Right. So that's the foundation there of what FTX was trying to do, was sort of use these celebrities as a way to, kind of wash their image and stand out as the trustworthy crypto intermediary. So, I think it's fair to ask, well, what gave these celebrities the assurances that what they were saying about FTX being the safe place to buy crypto was true, right? So, so that's the kind of the foundation. I mean, we can get into the specific, legal issues and what's really going on with the FTX class action, and there's similar class actions in other contexts, Voyager, Binance, for instance, is that, one, they were illegally touting securities. Okay. So by law, if you are promoting a security, including an unregistered, even if it's an unregistered security, you have to disclose the nature and the amount of that, that compensation, right, of that arrangement. But then two, it's also just illegal under the general anti-fraud provisions of securities laws to solicit purchases of unregistered securities, right? And that's really what was happening here. And so, when we look at the crux of these claims, we have to ask ourselves, was FTX listing unregistered securities? I think the answer to that question is unequivocally yes, they were. And then two, were these celebrities, promoting and soliciting purchases in unregistered securities? And in my opinion, I think the answer to that question is also a yes. Now, there's also claims of UDAP, unfair deceptive acts and practices violations at the state level, and that's just revolving around kind of general endorsement practices, right? But I think at the heart of the matter of these is these securities law violations. And by the way, if you're soliciting purchases in unregistered securities, that's a strict liability standard, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to prove that there's no mens rea requirement. Okay. And so and what that means is that these celebrity endorsers could be on the hook for all the losses.
The total amount.
The total amount, $8 billion. The total amount. So so there's a lot obviously riding on this class action. And as we said before, for millions of FTX customers and customers in Voyager and elsewhere, this is probably their best shot at getting anything, to be honest with you. So so certainly it's something to keep an eye on here.
And that will be in Florida, because I think Florida has the friendliest, or not the friendly, certainly not to these celebrities, but they've got the most favorable law for the customers in this context against the promoters of unregistered securities. So that, to me,
Yeah.
when we talk about all of this stuff and where's the industry going and all these platforms, listen, you could have Bitcoin. You don't need to go to one of these platforms or exchanges. You could buy, you put it on your wallet. You have,
Yeah.
so there is really, in my view, just two separate issues. Do these cryptocurrencies, you say there's no fundamentals, how do you value them? There's no book to value, whatever, but do they have their place in the world? And, does this whole, all this bad stuff happening with the FTX and the collapse and the fraud and the Ponzi schemes, in your opinion, is there a line of demarcation where you can say the cryptocurrencies in and of themselves do not suffer from all this Ponzi scheme, fraud, over leveraged problems that have afflicted these platforms?
Yeah, it's a good question. And before I address that, I want to go back to your venue point. Because I mean you're right, and you probably know better than I would that Florida might be a favorable jurisdiction from a plaintiff standpoint. But at least in the FTX case, we now know that FTX's headquarters, the U.S. headquarters, was in Miami, and this brand ambassador program, as they called it, was run out of the Miami office by an executive that was based in Miami. And you have a sworn affidavit from a former executive. I think he was head of compliance, Mr. Freeberg. I'm drawing a blank on his first name. That states that fact, that Miami was where this whole brand ambassador program was run out of. So, because this is one of the issues that the defendants had been pushing back on, was the jurisdictional question, and that Florida didn't have jurisdiction over them. So I think that is now fully settled. Given that we now know that the whole program was run out of Miami. In terms of the broader role of crypto, I mean, it's hard to predict. I mean, listen, as I mentioned before, here we are 14 years. I mean, who would have predicted this is where we'd be, right? This space has defied predictions from the very beginning. And so any type of prediction I were to make now, fast forward, 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now would probably be wrong, right? That's just the way this space has evolved. Yeah, I mean, to your point, right? You don't have to use these intermediaries. I mean, you can self-custody your crypto, right? You can have your own, digital wallet. You can maintain your own private keys, and that's generally the most secure way to hold on to your crypto. But you're not going to get any yield that way. I mean, there's a reason people use these intermediaries, and it's because it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's more convenient. It's the same reason that I don't store, cash under my mattress, right? This is just economics. This is comparative advantage, and crypto kind of bills itself as like, well, we're the solution to all these problems with intermediaries. And from my vantage point, intermediaries are providing a valuable service, right? And so I don't think intermediaries are certainly going away. And when it comes to the question of how do we regulate this space, I mean, that's where the focus lies, right? Is regulating the intermediaries, because that's historically how we've regulated, financial institutions and the financial systems, through intermediaries. So crypto very well, I like to joke that at this point, it's like a religion, right? I mean, it's even got its canonical text, the Satoshi white paper. And so the thing about religions, as we know, is that they can last for a very, very long time. So I don't think crypto's going away. There's certainly not an appetite at this point on Capitol Hill to ban it. So the question is, of course, how do we regulate it? I think post FTX, there's recognition on both sides of the political aisle that there needs to be some type of meaningful regulation. But the devil's in the details. But when it comes to investing in it, I tell my students, look. And nothing I say should be construed as investing advice. But I will say this: treat it like you're going to the casino. Don't bring more than you're willing to lose.
Yeah.
This is an extremely volatile asset class. One of the reasons it's volatile is because, in my opinion, it has no fundamentals. So, so with that said, if you're willing, if you have the willingness and the ability to take risk, then, by all means, but I think people need to be prepared to lose it all.
In the future of regulatory workup. And to me, I think the main question as an investor in the crypto space is, when are they going to decide whether these cryptocurrencies are securities or not? And then the fallout. I mean, is it possible that during these regulatory meetings, they're going to say, okay, we're going to make a decision and it's going to be a binding decision? I guess they could always, somebody could challenge it, up to the Supreme Court. But I think that that's gotta, for the industry, that's gotta be resolved sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. And it has been for, a decade now, really. Is, when it comes to cryptocurrency, is it a commodity or is it a security? Right. And that answer has, significant implications. And so, not to get kind of too far into the weeds here of how our markets are structured, but at a high level, commodity spot markets in the US, or cash markets, are not regulated at the federal level. Okay. And that makes sense when you think about it, right? Does the federal government need to be regulating a jewelry store, for instance, which technically is a commodity spot market, or a live cattle auction? Okay. Probably not. But the federal government does regulate commodity derivatives markets. Okay. So we have an agency called the Commodity Futures Trading Commission that regulates commodity derivatives markets. Now, they do have the authority to enforce, to take enforcement actions against fraud and manipulation in commodity spot markets. But otherwise, commodity spot markets aren't regulated at the federal level. So applying that to crypto, what that means is, because right now, these crypto firms, these exchanges, are claiming that all they're listing on their platform are commodities, they do not need to be regulated at the federal level, right? They do not have to register with any federal market regulator. Now, they have to register with an agency called FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which sits within the Treasury Department. But that is strictly for purposes of enforcing laws around money laundering and terrorist financing. Okay, so when we look at these crypto exchanges in the US, Coinbase, Gemini, you name it, they are not regulated in the way that New York Stock Exchange is regulated, or the NASDAQ is regulated, right? There's no requirements around segregating customer assets. There's no, prohibitions on, insider dealing, or, requirements around conflicts of interest. There's no net capital requirements, all right? There's no requirements to provide audited financial statements. I mean, if you're a public company, you do, but, again, the whole host of things that apply to a securities exchange don't apply to these crypto exchanges right now. Now, let's go to the security side of things, because right now there is, back and forth, a debate. And unfortunately, we have a situation where, Securities and Exchange Commission is having differences of opinion with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. What the SEC chairman, Gary Gensler, has said, and, I think as folks probably are familiar with, Gary Gensler is reviled by the crypto industry. He said, look, when I look at most cryptocurrencies, I see securities. Most cryptocurrencies are securities. And by extension, most cryptocurrency exchanges are listing unregistered securities, which, by the way, makes them operating an an unregistered securities exchange illegally, right? So why does he think that cryptocurrencies are securities? Well, it's through something that's called the Howey test, because our securities laws enumerate a number of things that qualify as a security, right? Things that we're familiar with, again, stocks, bonds, you name it. But then it's got this term called investment contract. Okay. And and this is how law works, right? Like a lot of ambiguous terms, it fell on the Supreme Court to define what an investment contract is. And it did so in a case from 1946, I believe, called SEC versus Howey. In this case, it actually involved an investment, a land
Oranges.
contract. Yeah, oranges, right, in Florida, Citrus Grove.
All places.
Yeah, of all places, right? And of course, this is another point that frustrates the crypto industry to no end, because they say, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that a case from the 1940s is what is being used to determine whether or not this fundamentally new technology and asset class is a security or not. And, for the lawyers listening, the answer is yes, of course, because the law is flexible, and it's flexible by design, as the Supreme Court has alluded to, right? Numerous times. And so what the Howey test is a 4-pronged test. All 4 prongs have to be met in order for an investment contract to exist. So number 1, is it an investment of money? 2, is that investment in a common enterprise? 3, is there an expectation of profit? 4, is that profit derived from the efforts of others? Right. So that's the principal test that you have to apply to each cryptocurrency on its own. Right. So it's a facts and circumstances test. So you can't just blanket say at this point, all crypto is a commodity, all crypto is a security, because it's going to get down to the nitty gritty in terms of how this token is operated, how it was created, right? Is there a central party, behind it? Is it truly decentralized? Why are people buying it? Why would they expect a profit? Or is there any marketing around the profit potential here, right? So it gets, so there's nuance, of course. And what, I would think, and I think other people think too, is at the end of the day, Congress needs to kind of settle this once and for all, right? That these kind of endless debates as a commodity, as security, it's not necessarily helping anyone. I happen to agree with Chair Gensler. I think that most of these cryptocurrencies are securities. I think most cryptocurrency exchanges are operating illegal securities exchanges. But Congress can settle this once and for all. And I think, what they should do is just, say that crypto, carve out a new definition, a new category of security in the securities laws, for cryptocurrency, and just say all cryptocurrencies are securities. We're going to give exclusive oversight over the crypto sector to the Securities and Exchange Commission, remove the CFTC entirely from the equation. And then you can let the SEC, if they feel the need to, draft, custom rules around crypto, as they've done in other contexts. I think, one issue in particular is around disclosure, right? I mean, that's kind of the essence of our securities laws, is that, it's merit-based. It could be the worst idea for a business in the world, right? And the SEC is not going to care. They don't pass judgment on the quality of the business. All they care about is that if you're raising money from the public by selling securities, you're disclosing, right, the adequate risk, and you're disclosing the information that investors need to make an informed decision, right?
Yeah.
So from a disclosure standpoint, I think it's probably pretty clear that the information that an investor in a cryptocurrency would want is probably different than the information an investor in, I don't know, Apple stock or Microsoft stock would want, because crypto is different in a lot of ways. But the SEC has, they have the authority currently, actually, if they wanted to use it, to develop a custom disclosure framework, because they've done it in other contexts, like mortgage-backed securities and other asset-backed securities, for instance. So, but I think, this is, and Chair Gensler, he testified recently in the House, and and he said that, he thinks that, he has all the legal authority he needs. He's certainly ramped up enforcement actions in the crypto space. But I still think at the end of the day, this is an issue that Congress is going to need to weigh in on. Unfortunately, from my perspective, they're not leaning into my idea. They seem to be leaning more into giving primary oversight over crypto to the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which I think is a mistake for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. All right. Listen, we've covered an enormous amount of ground, and I have so many more questions I want to ask, but it's Friday. I know you're ready for the 4-day weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and I just want you to promise me you're going to come back, because I want to talk about the proof of stake. Is it working? The environmental issues, the mining, the halving, updates on these lawsuits. So maybe 2 or 3 months from now, you'll come back on. We'll finish this up, or
you got it, Greg. There's always something to talk about in crypto.
There's always something to talk, and it always seems to happen in Florida or Miami. Howie in the Hills, by the way. Last quick story. I was driving to Disney World with my new girlfriend many years ago, and it was the Daytona 500, about 100 miles away. I'm thinking, oh my God, Disney World, Orlando, there's 2,000 hotels. I'm not going to get a reservation. So sure enough, I get to Orlando, and the Daytona is so popular, everybody goes over to Orlando to get So you couldn't, and it's midnight and I'm with my new girlfriend and I quote unquote, I shit my pants. Where am I going to go? So I just said, let's just keep driving north. And it's now like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting bleary eyed. And the next thing I know, I run into the sign, Howie in the Hills. This was before I knew about the Howie test. And I'm like, what kind? Am I hallucinating Howie in the? Anyway, that's enough. That's the end of this episode of Cut to the Chase with Lee Reiners, fellow at Duke Law School, Duke Financial Economic Center. Thank you for giving us a lot of information, a lot of interesting information, a lot of helpful information, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Greg. You too.
All right, folks, that'll do it.